first Food and Beverage Advisory Commission meeting to order on this 22nd of January 2019. I appreciate all of our appointees from our community. Thank you so much for being here, and I welcome Lee Jones from the Commissioners and Mayor Hamilton. Good to see you. Auditor Smith and Chief Deputy Munch. I almost pronounced it differently, so Munch. We will go ahead and get started, but we do have the first item on our agenda is actually an item from the county, and I don't see Mr. Cockrell here. Oh, you are behind me. It's like you peeked up over that monitor and surprised me.
I'll sit up here for this.
That would be good.
Because of the screen and such.
Before we get started, I do want to say that this was our first agenda request for funds from the food and beverage taxes collected. And like anything that you're doing for the first time, there are some kinks to work out. And I appreciate both the city and the county. They had submitted 2 requests. There might be some kinks we need to work out, and we will have that discussion now. So Jeff, thank you for going first. And I appreciate the opportunity to make this right for the people of Monroe County.
Okay. Well, let me, and I think there's a letter that signed by Mr. Niasen, but that I had reviewed, and I agree with it. I kind of just want to maybe give a little bit of background because this is the first request. The statutory language when the food and beverage tax was authorized by the state legislature for Monroe County had a provision in it that established this commission. So when the county council approved the food and beverage tax, this commission was established, and its establishment was essentially to assist and help with how the funds are to be used, helps the county council, city council. Part of the statutory language was that. And then the final provision, the final section that establishes this basically says, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because I don't have it in front of me right now.
I have it.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it?
I think it says the county and city legislative bodies must request the advisory commission's recommendations concerning the expenditure of any food and beverage tax funds collected under this chapter. The county or city legislative body may not adopt any ordinance or resolution requiring the expenditure of food and beverage tax collected under this chapter without the approval in writing of a majority of the members of the advisory commission. So I think that's kind of a little bit of the background. The lawyer in me wants to point out that on the county side, the legislative body does not do appropriations. It's the fiscal body, but we see those kind of mistakes in state code from time to time. And so my interpretation of that is that in order for us, the county legislative body, the county commissioners, or the city legislative body, which is the county, or the city council, which is also the fiscal body, so there's a little bit of a oddness there as well. They've got to come to this board first. And so we got to come to this board to get approval, say, hey, this is what we want to do. Is it appropriate to use the food and beverage tax monies for this purpose? And then the next step would be, I would go to the county council to seek an additional appropriation in a certain amount, in a certain line, and things like that. And as I explain what I'm asking for, I'll kind of tell you, hey, if you recommend it, here's my next steps and things like that. So what our request was, and the county commissioners approved this last Wednesday, was we know that there's going to be survey work required. We know that there's going to be some appraisals required, and we're pretty sure there's going to be some environmental requirements as well. All right, we're going to have to do those kind of studies as we move through this process. And so we don't know where all it's going to be, but we do know it's going to be between 2nd and 3rd Street and Madison and Walnut. So basically that square where we own property. And so, and I'll give an example. I talked with the representative for the owner of High Speed Tire. They're interested in selling that property. It's in that geographic area, and if we can work out an agreement with them, we intend to go to the commissioners and say, hey, can I get an appraisal on that? I've got a quote for the appraisal and things like that. And so we would move forward, again, with county council's appropriation to use these funds to do that, because ultimately, if we do purchase that, it's anticipated that that would be used for convention center purposes. So that's kind of a brief background. But we know those things are going to occur. I mean, survey and appraisals and environmentals, a lot of that has to do with how we are going to divest ourselves of some property or acquire property, or somehow, is this the appropriate spot to put this type of facility on? Those kind of questions need to be answered. So the request is allow us to do that. So if you guys approve and recommend we go forward, I will tell you my next step will be get it to our county council and get an appropriation in a 30s line for contractual services. I would expect it would be between $50,000 and $60,000, which roughly a third for each of those functions would be kind of what I would tell the county council is what we expect. That being said, you know, an environmental study might cost more because we don't know, or they're underground storage tanks. I think when we built the transit building, the city and the county worked together on that project. We found a bunch of, well, the city found a bunch of underground storage tanks that they didn't know exist. Part of our environmental study is to try to find those out before we get that far, but again, you never know. But that would kind of be my anticipated next step for these.
Well, thank you. Let's take some questions, if there are any initial questions from the Advisory Commission. We'll start to my right.
I have more of sort of a procedural question. When you fill out like this food and beverage tax advisory form and you give us this request and it says, this is sort of going into the public record, and that means that if we approve this, the only work that can be done is within the sphere, within those streets. If you want to go and do something a little farther out, you'd have to come back and say.
Yes, and I think the reason I did that geographic boundary is because the statutory language says it has to be used for the convention center or any other tourism-related item, right? And so I think given that geographic footprint, it's fairly confident that this is for the convention center and convention center purpose.
Oh, yeah, I understand that, but I just want to make sure that what this agenda request form says is what's in the public record, and the scope cannot be enlarged from there without coming back to us.
You would have to approve anything outside that scope. Now, you could say, county, we trust you, you could do it anywhere in the county. That's not the request, and I wouldn't expect it, but I think that's why I limited it geographically, is just to kind of make sure we all know what we're talking about.
So when we look at these requests, we have to kind of look at the parameters in which they're written in. And we've got to watch a little bit of the language to make sure that it doesn't go outside of the scope of what we feel the food and beverage tax should pay for.
And I think that, and I think my interpretation, again, of the statute, and anybody feel free to can disagree with me. Ultimately, you guys kind of set the parameters because there is vague. I think there's also a component where you guys are almost the gatekeepers for the citizenry, where even though it does meet the technical, yes, it is a tourism-related thing, but you know, this really isn't a priority for our community, and so we have some doubts about it. I mean, I think that's part of the conversation. I would hope that it's not part of the conversation when we're talking about something directly related to the convention center. But if it is, I'm more than happy to have those conversations.
Yeah, I just kind of want to, understand the ground rules. My second question is, with these, there's no not to exceed amounts or no, I mean, are we giving, and not you in particular, the county or the city or anybody else, carte blanche to spend whatever, I mean, and that could be that's part of the fiscal body's responsibility. I don't know, I'm just trying to kind of get the ground rules so I know,
Well, and again, I go back to, I think you guys can set some of these ground rules. I mean, honestly, whatever comes to this body, I have to take to the county council before anything can be spent. So, duplicating and not to exceed and things like that. I think for the ones I have on my agenda, if you guys wanted to say not to exceed 50, 60,000, I've got no problems. I think I'm covered, and I think we can move on. I think we can look at some of the more harder to define parts of the project. For example, if I do get the appraisal on the high-speed tire, I think the food and beverage money would be a source of revenue that we could use to purchase that. I also believe that the county share would probably not be adequate enough. Again, without an appraisal, I can't say for certain, to cover that expense. And so we might have to look at different areas. And so having you say not to exceed an amount, and then another funding source is not quite there, and we need to get a little bit more, or that kind of stuff, it can get a little complicated with some of the unknowns at this point. Now, I think if we were talking 3-4 years from now, I think a lot of those kind of big project unknowns aren't there, and we'll have fund buildup that we could say, well, we want to use this amount of this fund for this purpose. I think, in my mind, no matter what you say, we can't spend more than what's in the fund. And looking at the...
And it's funny, 'cause I'm not really talking about your
Right.
request. I'm talking about all requests that may come in, so that we kind of know what even the layout of the request should be. Should it have, this is the scope of the project, these are the parameters, this is the geographic area, this is blah, blah, blah. So no, I'm not, trust me, if Mick were over here, I'd be asking him the same questions too.
I think what you are highlighting, some of the questions that I had. In our form, we had details and kept it so, just so that the details could be filled in, but it was too broad. And I think some pieces of information need to be added to this form, one being the date that the legislative body sort of kicked off this procedure, because we get the request after the legislative body says, yes, let's move this. And so it would be helpful to know, when did that take place? In case there's a conversation, we want to go back and look at minutes or watch the CATS video and to alert the public. If they say, oh, this is interesting, I want to know more, it doesn't come here for the first time. So I wanted to add that and talk about adding that date to this form, as well as some sort of breakdown with the dollars that are requested. How much, not to exceed. That seemed like a reasonable piece of detail that we didn't really spell out on this form that would be helpful.
Is it all right if I weigh in? Corporation Counsel, hi Shelley. Hello. The way we are reading the statute, it's the fiscal bodies that approve the amounts, and it's your role to recommend the actual use. Are we within the parameters that you and Jeff were discussing? So for example, with the city's request related to the architects, we don't have an amount yet, but if we don't have you approve it now, we can't move forward working with the architect to even determine a fee, because it will slow things down. So we will have an amount very soon, but we believe that is for the council to determine. So that's
The
what I wanted to add.
council being city, the
Yeah,
county?
the city council is the entity that is supposed to contract with the architect.
I'd add, Mick Reneisen, Deputy Mayor, the city's approximately 90% of the collected tax revenue is dedicated to these expenses. The pre-development costs, the soft costs, and the construction costs. The county, of course, can opt to put any percentage they want into the project. At this time, no one's asking for that. So it would be the city council that would authorize the amounts based on the MOU and the contract. And I'll explain when I get up to do my request a little bit more about why we can't be so specific about cost parameters yet for the architect.
But that's actually not what this is for. This is to hire somebody. I thought that's why, this is to hire a project manager or to manage the project. That's not is that the architect?
There's 3 requests. The first one is the architect. The second one would be consideration. And this again would be sort of related to Jeff's 3-pronged approach for his. They won't all happen sequentially. We tossed around back and forth whether the best thing would be for this group to see sort of a litany of things that we anticipate coming before you, and then prioritizing the ones that are absolutely going to come first, second, or third. But we thought we would just get out there. These are the anticipated things that we would come to this body for you to authorize to see if these are the appropriate uses of the food and beverage tax. Mm-hmm. Then the project management piece, for example, that request, not likely to come forward until we're way into the design phase. But we just wanted you to know, at some point, we'll likely come forward in that. Same with the construction inspection. That's not going to happen until we have a designed structure and it's actually coming out of the ground. But you should know that eventually that might be a request that comes before this group. From my 3 requests from the city side, the most important one is the first one. We can't initiate any other steps in public engagement, in negotiating a contract, until we have authorization from this body that it's an appropriate use of funds, and then secondarily, the city council to authorize the amount. Since we don't even have an estimate for what the project cost will be, we can't give you the architect fee because it's generally a percentage of the cost of the project.
To reinforce what he said, these are city funds in the fund that we created to take the tax receipts.
Other questions?
I was just going to weigh in on this as the auditor. I think the committee needs to be very clear on the origin of the money that's going to be spent with these requests. So what happens is the money comes into the county and we divide it 90%, 10% until the end of the year. And then we rectify that to exactly match the parcel number associated with each food and beverage institution. So once we right-size that and we'll make an adjustment and a settlement with the city, and we have done that. So you have in front of you, I think they gave you one, and then I have a blank one for next year that you can follow along if you want to chart it. What we have in the bank right now, both groups, the city and the county, right now in the food and beverage fund for receipts, it's 0 because we've dispensed everything that we have so far. We will be getting we'll be getting in February, January's money. So there's 3 pots of money. There's the city's money that's been distributed to them. There's the county's money that's been distributed to them, and we just have the first distribution. And then there's the money that comes in to be split up. So I think one of the things that, as you design your form, you're going to want to check which fund you want it used from. Obviously, the city is going to use their money, and the county, if we do something, is going to use our money. But however, if Jeff say he gets approval to purchase the tire place that's near there, obviously it's going to cost more than $300,000, I would think, and we wouldn't have that. So we would have to ask for help or come up with some kind of funding source. So I think that for you guys to make good decisions, that's a critical piece of information for the Food and Beverage Advisory Committee. And so he made it clear where his money was coming from, but I'm not sure that we did on the county side, because we really don't know what they would ask for that property. And it'd be nice if we could get it really cheap, but if not,
I'm not asking for any,
No.
just to be clear, I'm not asking for any purchase money for any property.
Exactly.
You know, we own quite a bit of ground down
Yes,
there.
we do.
And so, as owners, I think, you know, the county is responsible for the environmental work and appraisals, and I think we're also responsible for some survey work on our land, right? And so that's what the request is. And it's, you know, I use that as an example of, you know, why it's important that we get these recommendations, is so that when I submitted the paperwork for this board, for the appraisals, I did not know that I may have an opportunity for that project. I did not know the county would have. I've had conversations with them for 6-7 months, and, you know, I've never gotten authorization to move forward. I get a phone call, and they're like, well, let me think about it again. And so I'm waiting to hear back. But, you know, I wouldn't have been able to give you that on Wednesday of last week or Thursday of last week.
But to clarify, I think the form needs a box that you check if it's county-only funds, if it's city-only funds, or if you're requesting a combination, because that's going to be a key piece of information in what you guys might see as appropriate use of our funds. So that's my 2 cents worth.
I probably don't really completely know what's going on right now. The split fund that you're talking about, is that an actual fund, or would that be a case where city and county are requesting together for some amount?
Exactly. It'd be a negotiated amount, but that way this board would know when we come to some kind of exact details. Right now, we're still in the planning stage, so we're still in the development of the form and the procedures. And so I'm just saying that's what I would like to see, because it will make sense to me on following the paperwork and making sure that we're doing it correctly.
Thanks. I guess as I look at this and the way that this is a new function, but the statute, the state has set up this body, from my perspective, to be the entity that says, okay, we passed a food and beverage tax, countywide, it's getting collected. It's our job to make sure it's not used for something that the city council or the county council decide, well, it says tourist and convention center, but we really want to build a new sidewalk here or there, or we want to do such and such with the money. And it seems to me this body is the one that says, no, wait a minute, we got to make sure this is used for the appropriate purposes. And then each entity that gets distributed that money has to do, as Jeff identified, has to make the decision how much to spend, but they're controlled, they're cabined, they're restricted by us saying, well, it can only be used for these purposes. And to me, I'm a little concerned if we get into details of telling the county council or county commission exactly how to use their money, in what amount or in what ways, that's kind of beyond our scope from my perspective. Our scope, and I think the reason we have tax people who collect the tax here, is to try to make sure that this tax isn't diverted to some non-convention center or tourist-related use. And to me, that's our important role, and to look at the collection, make sure that's fair, and to look at that, but not to say, oh, well, I don't want this wing on that convention center, or I don't want that detail of the expenditure from the fiscal bodies that receive the money for the purposes that we approve. So I think I'm not even sure we would ever ask for funding out of the collector fund, because who would appropriate that? Nobody's there to appropriate that, right? It has to be appropriated by one of the two bodies, right?
What I was concerned with is the projects are going to be big projects. There might come a time where we want to commit money that we haven't received yet, but we're committing it in the future for future use.
We, this body?
No, the city or the county. And I think,
Statutorily, I think it'd operate much like we do with the innkeeper's tax, when we use that as a source of revenue to pay back those kind of lendings, is that we would come to this body and we would have a formal resolution for this body that says, hey, yes, we agree that you guys can do multi-year financing based upon this revenue stream, and we're going to agree that this revenue stream would be available for that. I think that is something that I fully expect will happen with this at some point in the future. I think at some point in the future, the city, and I'm going to be right beside the city talking to you guys about this. The bond is going to be a bond is going to be issued. It's going to be more than a one-year bond. It is going to be a 25-plus year lending. It's going to be for a larger bond than I've ever gotten a bond for. And it's going to require you guys to say, yes, we're committed to this, and we are willing to allocate our revenue to pay for that. And we're going to not obligate it in any way that would impair that lending. And that's what's going to happen at some point in the future. How close we are to that and how far away is, we're in process of that. We're trying to get an architect on board so we can figure out a lot of the unanswerables, like how much are we going to spend? We need to get a year or so's worth of revenue so we can go to a financial advisor and say, what will this bring in? Those kind of questions are still out there. And so the question I'm asking for is, we know those are out there, but we also know that, as optimistic as we are, hopefully in the next few months, there'll be a need for us to get some appraisals. There'll be a need for us to do some environmental work. There'll be a need for us to, look at lot lines and maybe look at some surveys and get some more concrete data. And that's That's kind of why I'm here.
Mr. Tilly.
You talked about the funds being divided for 2018.
Yes.
Okay, so that means with the funds being collected this year, will we still see an accumulation? Or will we just see what's collected in 2019? And also, when expenditures start hitting, will we see the reduction of what it's doing to the fund?
Question. Okay, so how we're doing it today, which doesn't mean it's have to do it this way, but this is how we're doing it. As we get the amount collected, and that's the first column, we go ahead and distribute the city 90%. We leave the rest in the root fund. Then at the end of the year, we go through every single parcel number and we make a distribution to the county. So that's important because there could be an agreement down the road, as Jeff's saying, some kind of multi-year agreement for some kind of financing that says we want to pay this first and then we'll split up any money after that. And that's why, I'm not saying that's going to happen, I'm saying that could happen. So if we go ahead and upfront have a form where we fill out, is this the city money that they've been distributed? Is this the county money? Or is this some kind of, other? And so I just think that that's going to make it clear as we move forward discussing the financing of these projects, yeah.
That if the legislative body of the county is putting forth a request, the assumption should not be that it will come from the county's portion, and vice versa with the city.
Well, the form would have it checked on there where the funding's going to come from. Then if we reach a point where we know, like say the county needs to make a commitment, but we don't have enough money yet to make that, commitment because we're kind of like the body it's routed through, then we could check other and make a better explanation. I just think that it'd be easier to understand it if we're clear up front.
Yes.
I think we know today that both the requests are from the county fund and for the city fund. Is that Mick?
Actually, the way we broke it out just was to show you a couple things. That we are partners in the project, that the work product is being distributed amongst the respective staff, that we agreed this was the logical way to move forward because the county owns most of the land that has to be appraised, environmental studies are already done or will have to be refreshed, and surveys have to be done. The city has some too, but Jeff had agreed they would take on this part of the responsibility. And so all of these requests, to Kathy's question, is a good one, it doesn't indicate that on the form, are coming from the city's side of the funding.
I see. Okay.
And so the city council would have to approve that. So when Jeff has an actual number or Mick has an actual number, we will go to the city council and have those approved out of the city's roughly 90%. We're not asking the county to pick up anything at this stage. We split the work out for the reasons that I mentioned.
I like that. That means that we're going to have the city council designating money to go to the county staff to use to work. I think that's great. That's great collaboration too. I like that. That should be fun, kind of, at the city council. We'll have you there.
Just so we're clear, perhaps we should take some sort of a voice vote here, but to add to the current form, we would like to see, number one, added to this form, number one, which fund is this request going to come out of? City, county, other. The next one is a breakdown of dollars requested or not to exceed or no? Should there be some? Yes.
I'm just going to comment. I can't do that. I cannot give you the figure for the architect when I come up to present. Maybe I should do it from here. The next meeting of the steering committee, which will be this Friday, will be with the architect and all the steering committee members. That will help us inform the scope. The scope has to determine how much we think we can bond for out of the tax proceeds. We won't know till we collect it for a year, so we really can't set the total project cost. The city and the county may opt to add more money to the project cost, and all that's going to determine ultimately the architect's fee, because architect's fees are typically negotiated as a percentage of the construction cost of a project. Not a one of us can begin to tell you what that will be today. We can say that the first part, this Friday, will likely come up with a phase one approach, which would be everything conceptual to a certain part of showing everyone what the project could be, what land it might use, and then a blueprint phase to follow, which is the more in-depth, detailed phase. We'll have harder numbers as we move along. If you can't approve the first part, we can't hire the architect. Can't get the architect, we can't tell you how much the project is going to cost, because the architect does that estimate. So again, when we go to the city council, we'll have to give them something like this with a not to exceed amount, but today I couldn't give that to you. Maybe after Friday, and more discussions are held with the architect, with the steering committee members, we will be closer to saying a not to exceed amount, because that's what the city council would expect. But our legal opinions have both said they don't think that this has to be approved at that level of detail from this body, that's what the fiscal body's job is to do. So if you ask for that, we're going to be slowed down considerably. We're going to have to come to you with an amount and then find a schedule for the city council or the county council.
And that is based on how the actual statute is being interpreted?
Yes. And I let the two attorneys speak to that. That's what they've talked about.
The provision that Jeff was reading from, the very first part of it says, Advisory Commission, in order to coordinate and assist efforts of the county and city fiscal bodies regarding the utilization of food and beverage tax receipts. So to me, that is, the purview really is this an appropriate use, as the mayor said, or do you want to build, do you want to renovate the city-county building? It's got to be related to tourism, and you can see there would be a lot of gray area. What's tourism, what isn't? What's convention center, what isn't? And that's what you would be wrestling with and making recommendations then to the fiscal bodies about whether or not the amount that we then are able to come up with, if we are. I mean, we envision even with the city council coming up with a not to exceed, because we don't know what the architect fee is, but we can't even give them a retainer to get them started.
And if I could suggest, I think a lot of these issues we're struggling with are because of where we're at in this project, right? I've gone to the county council once a year for the last few years to do some bond work and allocate funds amongst the bonds, where we do have set numbers on how much we are going to appropriate or how much we think each different phase of that project's going to be, and I anticipate 5 years from now, I think that's going to look a lot more like what's going to come to you guys. But right now we're at the, quite honestly, the biggest project I'll ever work on at the county, right? We're looking at a $30 to $40+ million project, and we need to get those numbers fine-tuned. And in order to do that, we need to have the architect on board to kind of help us fine-tune those. I guess my perspective is, I think it's okay to put, hey, we want a not to exceed or some kind of amount on the form, but I would allow whomever to kind of fill in underneath that on the form. Hey, we can't give you that because of, right now we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because of where we're at in the process. We expect to have that kind of information by this, and we expect it to be a percentage of the total construction cost, which, by the way, you guys are going to play a role in approving, right? Because it'll have to come to this board in order to get the necessary guarantees that money is only going to be used for that purpose. That first dollar in is going to go until it's paid for, right? I think this is just kind of one, it's unique, and two, I think this is what it was approved for.
So maybe this and that. Maybe there is space on here that identifies the dollar amount, but it doesn't have to. I mean, it's not limited to that. It can also have room for narrative, that if this body needs to have an idea of what we're talking about in terms of expenditures, list it And if it doesn't, we can read that and why it's not possible to know what that dollar amount is.
I would have a spot, and if I come to you and I don't know, and I can't give you what I consider to be a fair estimate, I would put unknown, and if there's room, see below, and then in the body of the form, I would write, hey, the reason I don't know this is this, and this is why it's important that we continue to move forward. I think that's reasonable.
How do people feel about this?
I can understand the problem with the architect. That's an initial problem. Jeff had no problem at all giving us some prices for his requests. It seems to me that most requests, it would be possible to at least come up with a not to exceed number, which can give us a much stronger idea of where things are actually going with this. And I think if there should be more examples like the architect where you really can't come up with even a not to exceed amount, then a narrative would be acceptable. But I think it had better explain pretty clearly, why it's impossible to come up with at least a not to exceed amount.
Might I try to use my example as a way to see if we can, because it's the hardest one. It's the most unknown. So in the narrative, I can tell you a couple of things to answer questions from the Advisory Commission. The City Council requested this on January 16th, their week ago Wednesday meeting, and that's a very valid point. We didn't know at the time when we were generating a form, but we can say that the fiscal body of the city requested this, and it's in their minutes on the 16th. In the detail section for the architect, I've indicated a range. Typically, architect fees are between 5 and 10% of the construction cost. The unknown, and you could, for today, if you wanted to use it as an estimator, we think that the tax is generating what was projected in the HVS study from about 6 years ago, that it's tracking towards that $2.5 to $3 million total figure. So if you use that, and I've got a controller over here who can tell us how much debt we could issue for that at some point in the future, it would probably cover about a $30 million project. And that's why we've put in here, we estimate about $30 million. Now that could be augmented again by other sources of funds, which would come from either the county's portion or the city's portion or somewhere else. That could always be augmented. So to Commissioner Jones's point, if you wanted to kind of think of this in a range, 5 to 10% of 30 million would be roughly what the minimum maximum the architect fees could be. So that's $1.5 to $3 million for the architect fees. And that's what it's going to end up probably being, somewhere in there. Today, the city has $2.27 million in its collected portion of the income tax. Clearly, that's going to be added to as months roll on, and clearly the work of an architect is going to take months, if not a year, before we ever get to a bid document date. And then we'll know an engineer's estimate from the architect. We'll have a bonding amount that you all will have been able to see and approve, and then we'll have a sort of more finite cost. But this one's the hardest one to get to simply because of the wide array of variables. But if that helps any, it kind of gives you the range, and it also says today the city could pay that portion, or will be able to pay that portion as the continued proceeds come in from the food and beverage tax collections.
Yeah, what I was actually suggesting is, yes, this particular portion is unknown, but it sounds to me like this is an outlier, that requests from now on could be more specific. In most cases, maybe not all.
I think that's probably right. I think that this one's the hardest one, and Jeff gave you an estimate for roughly what the not to exceed could be for his section. When we get to the project management pieces, not today necessarily, down the road, we'll have had all these other answers filled in, so we'll be able to say, well, we know that a project manager costs X%, and we'll now have a hard cost for that. Same with the inspection. We're going to know the construction budget by then. We'll be able to say that's a percentage of the construction costs. We'll have a harder number. This by far is the biggest variable for that. But the
is.
most important one, because we can't do any work without the
Yeah,
architect.
but I would say it's actually helpful.
Okay.
I think it's helpful for the public to know what we're talking about, have an idea of the scope of this project. I mean, it's going to be owned by all of us, and it's exciting, and to have an idea, just what Mr. Cockrell was saying, it could be maybe the biggest project that has happened in our community, and to be able to provide just as much of an idea, scope of what we're talking is helpful. So if we could add those things, and so I think we have 3 things that we'll add to this form. It doesn't mean we can't still go ahead and move on this, because I think a lot of this was clarified today, but we'll add that to the form.
Okay.
Is that, all in favor, say aye. Oh,
Just making sure we got the 3 things is requested
the
by,
date,
and the not to exceed, and the fund, the target fund
Yes.
that it's used for. And are our lawyers okay with that? Does that make sense? Okay, yeah, good, just want to make sure.
wonderful.
Thank you. Aye.
I think that passed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. Now, we do need to move, or make a motion, I guess, to approve the county's request.
Shall we amend it to put that data in there?
Mm-hmm.
First, I'll move the county's agenda request form dated 1/10/19. And maybe as I move it, I can ask that, get help to fill in those blanks as we would suggest.
I would say it was requested by the county commissioners last Wednesday,
Jan
which
16th.
which I believe was the 16th.
Okay.
That's 1, 2, I think that, I think, given what Mick says, I would anticipate probably the use of both city and county funds, because I know there are some things that, one, the county, there is an appraisal that we want to do for the high-speed tire, and I'm working with the guy, and I don't see any reason to kind of mess things up. So I would say that we allow either fund to use that. We do own quite a bit of property, and I think we'd want to make sure that if it's our cost, we can pay for it.
So both city and county accounts.
Yes.
And then third, not to exceed, and just be
I
conservative.
I think it's not to exceed, and I can't imagine it going over 50, 60, or $60,000. I think 20 each. If it does go over that, we need to come back and talk to you guys anyway.
So I'll move it with those 3 additions to the form, okay?
All right, we have a motion on the floor, and we take public comment here, or
I would.
I want to take public comment. Do we have any public that would like to make a comment on this motion? Seeing none, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We do have to have a written consent sent to the legislative bodies.
I guess to both bodies then.
To both bodies.
Will you authorize the president to sign that, reflecting the vote of the committee?
I think it has to be signed by the majority of the members.
I think that's how it's written.
Signed by?
It's got to be
Can we do that today? That form? So just sign it?
Thank you. I'll have it just in case. Okay.
Can I, just before you leave, can I suggest maybe in the narrative we add that estimated project cost? We have the 5 to 10% in the narrative, but if you put, I would suggest putting 30 to 40 million as the estimated project cost, just to give a little room, and that you could put that in the narrative. And what was the date of the,
The city's request from the city council came also on the 16th.
on the 16th?
Thank you, Joe.
And that's to the city fund only?
That's correct.
Right. Okay, thanks.
And our second agenda item request, which will go faster because now we worked that out, is Mr. Reniason with the city. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you. I think I've said most of what you needed to hear. I would just clarify that the mayor's indicated 30 to 40 million. It makes me nervous to put numbers out in the public because we're still negotiating things, but I think it's fair to say that's been a number that's been fairly publicly mentioned. So it's 5 to 10% of 30 to 40 million. And I would anticipate that when the steering committee meets Friday, that we'll likely do that in sort of different buckets. There'll be a phase 1 and a phase 2 of an architectural arrangement, but still that number should be looked at as 5 to 10% of the larger number, 30 to 40 million. So that would mean, and swallow before you hear this, that could be $4 million worth of fees at 10% as a not to exceed amount.
Thank
But
you.
when the architect is watching this, I want you to understand that is not part of the negotiation of this contract with you.
Thanks for the
We're just
clarifier.
setting a outside parameter. Thank you.
The second and third requests really can be left until we have more information. I really wanted, Jeff and I both wanted to get those to the body, just so you'd understand at some point we'll be coming forward likely with these other things down the road, and we'll refine those now with the new form, and we'll have a not to exceed amount, and that will probably be much more refined than this first one. So I'm actually really only requesting this first architectural
first one.
fee authorization, and then we'll take this, actually, I can give you, we are on the city council's agenda, if this is approved today, for February 6th, 13th, and 20th, which means after February 20th, we could have an architect on board and we could start the very public process of getting public input, and the part that I think everybody's anxiously awaiting to get to. So pending your authorization, we would be on the council schedule to make the next step.
Okay. So we need a motion on, here.
So I'll move adoption of the agenda request from the city as amended in the 3 ways we discussed, with the January 16 request date from the city, and with the identification of the city fund as the source, and with the addition of the estimated $30 to $40 million total project cost added at the end of that narrative.
Second.
Any public comment? Seeing no public comment, I did see a thumbs up, but seeing no public comment, we will take a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And thank you, and we'll look forward to hearing back from you on these other 2 items. And we're going to just sit tight for a moment until Mr. Cockrell can get back up and to our meeting, and we can sign the paperwork.
And I want to thank the advisory commission. I know this is your first pass at this. It's all of our first pass at this, so thanks for your leap of faith and making sure we're following everything as we should be doing. And I understand it's a big request, a lot of money. Jeff's mentioned the significance of this project for our community in scope and scale, and it will be. And it's great to have our county partners and city partners working together on this. So thank you for your role in participating and making this next step go forward. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. I was just going to ask, maybe we could talk about the sheet, thank you, that the auditor shared with us, just to make sure we understand it a little better. It's the first time we've finished out a year. And it was helpful to understand the allocation of the funds, kind of keeping one in that joint fund till the end. I just want to kind of understand what the unsure column is, I guess, and how that's calculated or dealt with.
Can I see what you're looking at?
Oh, I'm
think-
sorry. What am I looking at?
We did have a,
It's been updated since that email went
Oh, really?
okay.
Where's the new one?
out. There were still some parcel
Oh,
numbers.
that
we
one,
were
I
looking
see,
into.
I see. That one. Does everybody have it? I guess
Okay, so let me just kind of tell you a little bit about this form.
Sure.
So what happens is, we have this memorandum of understanding the county does with the city. So as we get the money in, it's easy to partition off your 90% and send it to you. And then the amount that we leave behind is 10%, and we don't move that into the county coffers. We leave that out there in the committed fund without designation. Then at the end of the year, we look at every single parcel number where the location of each entity is. For instance, if you have, let me just give you an example, a food cart. A food cart could put down that they're this address, but they're really a mobile person. You have to figure out where is it actually parking and selling their items, because that's the collection point. So at the end of the year, we try to move every single unknown to unknown. And with the exception of, I think it's $12 and a few cents, we have located exactly where everything has been sold. So then what we do is we look at those parcel numbers at the very end, and we say, okay, so this parcel is a Perry City parcel, but this parcel is a Perry Township parcel, so that's a county. So then what we do is we add up all the parcel numbers in the county, and we come up with a total number, and is it more or less than 10%? And whatever the deviation is, we go back and make a settlement with the city. In this case, it was like around 12%. But we only had 10% left in the fund. So in December, we right-sized that number to make it exactly what those parcel numbers would have been had we done it correctly in the beginning. When people report, they don't necessarily say where they're selling things. They might say like a post office box. Does that make sense? So we have to chase that entity down and find out, where are you really selling this at? Where is your business, and at what location? And is that a city parcel that you're selling that on, or is that a county parcel? So the unsure part are the ones we're still waiting for information back to verify exactly where those things were sold.
And it's only $12?
Difference. That's what we have $12 we haven't nailed down yet. Is that fair to say? We have $12 we haven't nailed down yet. We've worked very, very, very hard on this project.
I thought I saw something that said there's about $86,000 of uncertain allocations. Is that,
At one time there was. Give me an example. Kroger's.
okay?
Kroger's is a large amount.
Right.
But they pay in one lump sum.
Right.
So there has to be a funding mechanism to split that out. So that's one of the
So how do we split
larger
that
ones.
out?
Well, they have to provide us with the information to do that. And I can't give you details because I'm not
Have they
privileged to
done
do
that,
that.
though?
Yes, and anyone that, like, I'm trying to give you an example without really,
No, I,
yeah,
What you're saying is, the example of Kroger, you have now, the form we received, you've done additional work
right.
to
There are
that.
rules
And now that
associated with that based on
mystery, or where that was.
the
when it was
percentage
the
that was
common
collected in
fund.
each place. I can't tell you what those percentages
don't
are.
need to-
However, that takes a lot of work. You have to work with the companies, and it's not something that's easily done. And so it was quite unsure in the beginning, although the numbers were small. So when you looked at, like, the first one, $89,000, it could be 50% that was unsure at that time, and that be only $40,000. But in the end, when you're $302,000, if you have 1% that's unsure, that's a lot of money. But we've really narrowed it down, and now we move forward. We know these parcel numbers and where these people are located. So now it's going to be easier to distribute it. But the memorandum of understanding still says we give the city 10%, and we, at the end of the year, then we settle with them, and that's what we do. So it's going to be my direction, unless the county commissioners wish otherwise, to continue giving the city 10% each month, 90% each month, and keeping 10% in the unsettled account, in the parent account where it gets deposited. And then in December, then we will go back and we will check every single parcel, what was collected for this piece, for all 399 parcels we did this for. Then, and then we will make a settlement with the city again. Now, we have new people creating restaurants, and I think we have, how many new ones?
This past month, there was
Always
11
changing.
new.
Yes, so it's very
Say that again,
dynamic.
sorry.
There was 11 new restaurants that paid this past rotation.
And then you have a couple that are become defunct. But the reason I think it's important to let you know where we're at, so that you know you solidly have this amount of money to, as of the end of November, $245,816. Had I given you 10% more, it would have been a little bit more than we should have given you for the year. So that last month settled up with you for the exact amount you should have gotten, based on that memorandum of understanding. Now, while Jeff is gone working on that, I will go back to a point. Down the road, if down the road we come to agreement, the city and the county, and we get this great new facility, right? And there's a bond on it, a pretty substantial bond. That bond, the city and the commissioners of the county may decide we're going to put all of the food and beverage money that we collect towards that bond payment. And if so, it wouldn't make any sense to divide it out and then pay it from two different sources. Does that make sense? So it depends on what you guys decide down the road to keep that parent fund and have it all deposited in there, and then write 2 checks out of it, one to the county, one to the city.
So eventually, the money for the county and the parent fund does move to, and is that done on
It
a
moved in
yearly
one check.
basis?
Yes, in December,
When-
and it moved in one check.
Okay.
The check was written for $311,813.50, and it's just recently been done because we just got December's money in.
Point, I think according to the statute, the money has to be divided. It says the city funds shall go into a fund at the city and the county shall go into a fund in the county. So we would just have to agree outside of that once it's already deposited. It is what it is, they drafted it.
In the statute?
I don't know that it says the schedule in the statute. Let me see. You can move on and I can figure it out.
So on a project that's as long as we anticipate this being, we may want to go back to the state and ask for a different legislation. If it depends on what it comes out being and how large the bond is, but it might make more sense to go back to the legislation or legislators and ask for, rewriting that a little bit to be able to pay it right from the Department of Revenue sources to with just one check. And the reason why is a 30 or 40 year project, or $30 or $40 million project, 25, 30 years, that most of us won't be working here then. And it just seems like that's an awful lot of work over the course of dividing this up. I mean, it's a substantial amount of work.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. It does say monthly. Monthly, those distributions are divided.
Yeah, I just have some clarifying questions for you. So I'm looking at the report that was dated 1/16/19. It said the city's collection actual was $2,270,379.45, which was 89%. The county's actual was $202,515.34, which was 8%, and there was unsure of $85,955.77. So even if that full amount was allocated to the county based on your calculation, why would the percentages not be 89 and 11? I'm just trying to understand how you got to 88 and 12. So this was,
We appreciate everybody's hard work on this. I know
Okay,
it's
this
complicated
was-
and we're figuring out, and it's a little complex because
this said it was,
under state law,
I don't know, I think this
the controller of the city is not permitted to look at the numbers, which is a little complicated. And we're trying to get that approval from the state, and they've taken quite a few months to do that, so we're figuring it out.
this fed
They're working
was fed
together.
into from other spreadsheets.
okay, I was just
And
trying
so
to
it didn't-
understand
no,
how,
the
yeah.
last
I mean,
one
the
is
math
not
here
correct.
was, yeah.
No,
Okay, so is this,
And neither is this entire copy.
you should even have that, because that's not, those are ones we're working on each month. In other
Okay.
words, in this month,
thought he
there were
was here.
$9,000 in question that we had to go back to
Oh.
the root, because some we'd
right.
already solved.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand from this
Yeah.
if,
What I don't recall. When we decided to do the 90-10 split,
That was just an estimate.
it was just an estimate, I know.
As a workbook
Oh, yeah, yeah.
instead of
And-
just this.
It was pretty decent.
That's my mistake.
Pretty close.
I just want to know, first, we just want to make sure that it's getting assigned appropriately.
Yeah, sure.
Make it simple.
Did you have that, did that get,
What he was asking is the workbook got sent, so there's a column
right,
that
and,
says unsure.
yeah, and
Which are
that
ones
got
we
worked
have to
out.
go back and look and say, this parcel number is a personal property parcel number. What is the associated real estate parcel number?
And you've gotten that
We have to go to the
boiled
assessors, we have to.
all the way
work
down
it.
to $12?
Yes,
Yeah, and that's what I thought, okay.
which is
Do you-
something that still is a post office box, we can't.
Just for the public listening, I think it was additional work had been done on that worksheet, and the worksheets that were sent out earlier had an amount in the 80,000, I don't remember the exact amount, of tax monies collected that had not been distributed either. We were unsure of where it came from, but that amount has now been I guess, allocated down to about $12, whether it came from the city or from the county. And I hope that summarizes your question, Jeff. Is that? Okay. We're still waiting on that paperwork to sign. It's almost ready. Okay.
He was doing it fast.
So our next meeting will be, let's see here, February. Just gonna look here at the date. Prior to that, we'll send around the edited, updated version of the agenda request and make sure everyone takes a look at it, that we haven't forgotten anything. Let's see here, what do we have? Our next meeting will be February the 9th, the 26th. February 26th. At 4 o'clock, we'll meet right here in the Nat U Hill meeting room. And does anyone else have anything else to report? Any birthdays? Any anniversaries? Anything for the common good?
We can just hang around and sign.
All right, we'll hang around and make sure we sign it.
I do have something interesting that the members might enjoy listening to. So as we did the work associated with this, and of course there was a lot of footwork, there was a lot of calling, a lot of emailing back and forth and waiting for return phone calls, we kind of were figuring out what is the best way to add people and what is the best way to delete people. And I'll give you an example. We got some money from MCL, which hasn't been here for a long time. We weren't quite sure what to do with that. I know that sounds strange, doesn't it? I can't tell you how much, but anyway, we got something from MCL. Now, so if we get something, we have to verify, first of all, that they did send it to the right county, because we have had some that have been sent to the wrong place. So that's one question. But the other thing, as we get new restaurants or restaurants split and add another entity, for example, I'll pick Lenny's. If Lenny's gets a new piece of business, right, they could still report it under Lenny's, correct? And you probably would. But if unless you had a different location that you were actually selling the food at, then it wouldn't matter to us because it would still be the same parcel number. So as we get the new entities, we have to decide, where are they located? So we are feeling like the best way to map the new ones is to work with the health department as they give their initial inspections, and to provide a document to them to drop off. There's 2 inspections. There's the initial inspection before they open, and then there's the one, how many days after? 30 days after. So at the initial inspection, we can give them paperwork and say, this is our legislation, this is what you need to do, you have to sign up with InBiz before you can pay it at Indiana, in tax. So there's just like a 2-step at the state level. process, and then we can go back and verify the, when we do the second inspection, did you have any trouble signing up? Or are you good to go? And I think that will help us never to miss anyone. So I thought you might enjoy that.
It's an excellent idea.
Brief break.
I think you've also reopened some old wounds that people really miss MCL still. I still hear about it. Thank you. That's good. I think a motion for adjournment.
We've got it worked out fine. It was a long.
All right, this meeting is adjourned. We'll see you in February. And don't leave before you sign. Thank you.